thank you for coming out on a Wednesday night to learn more about the Boundary Flood Recovery process. Tonight, what's going to happen is we'll hear for about 20 or 25 minutes from the folks up on stage here, and then we'll hear a couple other resource people from the audience, and then it'll be turned over to questions. So there'll be lots of time for questions. I will have the roving microphone for questions. So if you do have a question, put your hand up. I'll come to you to ask your question, get an answer, and go from there. So you'll notice that Les Johnson is recording in the back there. We also have some note takers. So at the end of this, we'll be able to compile the questions and send them back out on the web so everyone gets a chance to get them. So the main person doing the talking right now is going to be Steve Newton, and he's going to take it after an introduction and welcome from the mayor. So Mayor Conrad, if you could come up for a couple of minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Just to concur with Kevin had said, yes, welcome, all of you. What we have now is we have all our technical people here to give you some of information which I feel is very imperative that gets put out, and we'll have these regularly now so that we can convey as much information to all of you out there as we can. So with that, I pass it on to whoever's next to speak, which will be Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Newton. I'm the recovery manager. For those of you that were at the last town hall meeting that we had, we explained a little bit about what the process there is going to be like. But anyway, I'm in for a bit of a short term for a few months to help set up the organization and get things kind of flowing smoothly. And then it's going to transition over to Graham here as the recovery manager and what have you. And I'll put that in context for you a bit in a minute here. But first, can I have the next slide, please? So I thought I'd just share this thought with you here, because from my perspective, it gives a little bit of context around what we're trying to do in the recovery program here. When you plant a flower and it doesn't grow, you don't blame the flower. And I bet you there's some flower growers here in the room for sure. You blame the environment. So we've been working through the transition period from response, now that the waters have receded, through into recovery. And recovery is a very complex thing, and I'll give you a little bit of context around that in a moment. But really what this is about is we're trying to build that best environment so that you folks and the community and the general boundary area come back more resilient and better than prior to the floods. That's the goal, and that's sort of the underlying philosophy of pretty much everything that we do on the recovery team. So a little bit about how recovery was, how we got to this point here. So about a month or so ago, well actually it was June 4th, I arrived here in town at the request of Chris Marsh and Dan Derby from the RDKB. They have a regional emergency management program, and I've worked with those guys at Fairmont in the past, so they know what I'm about, and I definitely know them and what have you. They made a decision, and it wasn't an easy decision, but I think based on what we're seeing, it was the right decision. They could have brought in a bunch of these high-priced consultants, and when I say high-priced, I mean really high-priced, who would have gone around and pulled out their templates and their cookie-cutter reports and filled in a bunch of blanks, and then handed over a report and said, here you go recover. Okay, I mean, that's a little bit crass, but that's kind of how that flow would go, right? Instead, they made a decision that this was going to be a community-led recovery. And a few reasons for that, but the primary one was, again, so that the area and its people could come back bigger and better than before, with more resilience, some capacity and new knowledge, and every one of these people up on the stage, I can guarantee you, have learned quite a few new things in the last few weeks through this process. So that knowledge is going to stay here when and if something else happens in the future, as opposed to having been exported with experts that are off to the next community. So when I first got here, the first thing I did pretty much was a little drive around with Chris and Chief Derby, and we went out into the field there. We looked at the high water, and we looked at some of the impacts, and I spent about a day just trying to scope what was going on. I needed to get my mind wrapped around how big this was, what the impacts were, who was impacted, and those sorts of things. And from that process, we're able to sort of identify some sort of key activity areas, and I'll show you that here in a bit. But the next stage of that was to identify the best people to lead those different activity areas. So again, with that whole focus of this is a community-led initiative, there was a fair amount of conversation about who would be the best people, you know. Your elected officials were involved in that, some emergency management folks were involved in that, members of the business community and what have you. And we sort of landed on some names, and then the next step, of course, was to go talk to these people to see, do you want to join the team and help out, right? And I don't know, it certainly wasn't an effort on my part to recruit people for their absolute mad passion about the community, but as it turns out, that's what we got. We got some people here that are absolutely passionate about helping. And several of these folks have been here right from day one since the first floodwaters started to come up. And they've been working long, hard hours for you as well as for their organizations. So basically, the group was handpicked, and then we pulled them together. So that's when we started into the storming stage of that storming, forming, norming piece, right? So everybody had to figure out what was going on. You know, what do I do? I've got my regular day job, but how does that fit into this recovery piece? And those sorts of things. We had to figure out, you know, who can do what, who's got skills, what capacities are out in the community, what isn't in the community, and if not, where do we get it? Who's going to pay for all this? There was just a whole lot of stuff that we had to kind of sort out. And I'll just add that quite openly, the Emergency Management BC folks in the provincial government will admit that there is no corporate knowledge in the provincial government around this kind of a recovery. So there's lots of good planning that's gone into the big earthquake when it hits the lower mainland. There's lots of good planning and operational practice around wildfires and sort of disease-based, you know, pandemics and avian flu and all that kind of stuff. But there really isn't anything that's been developed for small-town British Columbia, for the rural recovery piece. So we're kind of figuring out a bunch of this on the fly as we go. Now we're fortunate because we've got some really smart, committed people here. We've got a very supportive community, and we've got a lot of external agencies that are just waiting to help and already have been helping, and you've seen a number of them here in town, so I won't belabor that point. So anyway, once we sort of started forming up a little bit, which we're still very much in that stage, these people were kind of tasked with figuring out what their piece of this puzzle needed to look like, and what did you need to make your section sort of most successful. And, you know, what's your end state? What's success mean to you? And things like that. And then from that stage, they started working on planning for their sections. And so we're very much in that phase right now. There's some of the planning elements are fairly advanced, and there's already been things underway, and you'll get a little bit more information on some of that tonight. There's some other things now that we've got to figure out how to do. You know, so for example, there's a bunch of provincial government ministries. They've got different kinds of legislation, which in some cases makes them illegal, makes it illegal for them to give money up for things that they're not legally allowed to. So there's a bunch of challenge and complexity around that. It's pretty easy to get roads built and dikes built and that sort of stuff. It's less easy to address the coming social challenges 12 to 24 months out, when all the stresses and the pressures start to hit some of the families, and we start to see that manifesting out through different ways. So there's a whole bunch of real complexity around that sort of stuff as well. But anyway, so we've got the team together. It is a community-led initiative, and what I'd like to just do real quickly is have each of the section leads here introduce themselves and the organization that they're from. I'll start with Darren.
Good evening. My name is Darren Pratt. I'm the Executive Director of Boundary Family Services. So we are the longest running nonprofit social service agency in the Boundary, and we've provided services for everything from prenatal care all the way through to adult and family counseling. Our strategic partnerships in community existed before this incident. So through this process, we've been able to pull in all of our resource partners, such as the school district, Interior Health, Ministry of Children and Family. So this is just building on the community capacity that we already had coming in.
My name is David Reed. I'm the manager of operations at the City of Grand Forks. Worked at the city for 19 years, providing lots of the services with water, sewer, electrical, roads, parks, trails, that kind of thing. The critical infrastructure lead for this recovery.
Hi, I'm Jessica Mace, and I'm the coordinator for the Kettle River Watershed Authority. We're kind of a newish entity, but we are a committee of the Regional District of the Kootenay Boundary Board.
Hi everybody, I can't really see, the lights are really bright up here, but I know you're out there. My name is Jennifer Wetmore. I am the Manager of Community Economic Development at Community Futures Boundary. Community Futures Boundary celebrated its 26th year of operation here in the Boundary region last year. We are committed and dedicated to the Boundary region. We offer a myriad of services, including Work BC, employment program, community economic development services, business development activities. I was approached to take on the role of team lead economic recovery business support process here. And so that's why we're here this evening, to give you an update.
Good evening, I'm Bob Huff. Excuse me, I'm the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity Southeast BC. And Habitat was invited to try and find solutions to the housing crisis here in Grand Forks. And one of the strengths that we have is we have done a very excellent job of building relationships in the community here with other businesses, other charities, and there is obviously a very dire need here for some short-term as well as long-term solutions for housing.
Thank you, Graham Watt. Prior to this, I was senior planner with the City of Grand Forks. Been involved in integrated land use, environmental housing planning and that kind of thing. Before that, I actually worked on the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan and a number of other plans in the prairies. And I think it's kind of the right place at the right time that I was in the Emergency Operations Center for a while this spring. But my learning curve, which was steep before, is skyrocketed. I'm very happy to be working here with Stephen on this process this evening.
I think he's just asking for a raise. So again, my name is Steve Newton. So up till May 31st, the last 7 years of my government career before I retired was with Emergency Management BC. So in fact, I spent a couple of weeks, the first 2 weeks of this event, sitting in the Provincial Regional Emergency Operations Center in Nelson, running the Emergency Management BC side of things. And then I retired on the 31st, and like I said, I was here on the 4th. So I'm here because I understand emergency management, I speak emergency management, I understand all the government processes, I understand all the different agencies that can come to bear to help support this, and I know most of the people, and most of them fairly well. So that's kind of why I'm here as well. Can I get that, the next slide? So this, folks, is your environment that's here for the next months to years, whatever it takes, to kind of help you recover and help the community and the larger boundary area recover on a number of different fronts. So it's a pretty straightforward reporting relationship. There's a recovery manager up at the top there who reports to the chief admin officers. So Diane Henry from town here and Mark Anderson from the regional district are working jointly on that. Okay. The deputy recovery manager, Graham, again, he's from town here, and you just heard from his brief introduction. He knows an awful lot about just about everything that needs to be done in this recovery. He just doesn't know that he knows it yet. So we're going to help him learn it a little bit better. So at some point before all that long, I'll step away from this, and then Graham will be here for the next year or two, or whatever that sort of looks like. Okay, we brought Kevin in. You saw him introduce the opening here and what have you. He also works for the city, but he's also going to be the public information officer. So absolutely, we realize that there's been a void in information the last few weeks, and nature abhors a vacuum, and in the absence of good information, rumors, conjecture, all that, anger, all that stuff sort of manifests. So part of why we're here tonight, and part of why we're going to commit to a regular update to you folks, is so that you do know what's going on, and that you do know that there's a lot of people sort of going to bat for you to help support you. We're using a structure called Incident Command System, or ICS. It's a standard organizational structure that you find in pretty much any of the military or first responder or emergency services. So, for example, any of you might have popped into the Emergency Operations Center over here at the Regional District Building. You would have seen people wandering around in colored vests. Each of those vests represents one of these positions here. So the basic premise here is that pretty much any incident can be managed under an operations branch, a planning section, a logistics section, or a finance section. And together those four core kind of sections, if you will, come together to kind of manage the whole thing. So currently we've got some folks in these positions. We've populated most of the core ones by now. So the operations section, which is where most of the rubber will hit the road, so to speak. You've been introduced to those folks. We've got who we're calling the new guy, Travis. He just showed up a couple of hours ago, starting tomorrow. So he'll be net new to the organization. But he went to Selkirk College, so relatively local. Okay, we've got Michelle Cipressi from town here. Many of you probably know her. We originally had her flagged for admin support, but she basically disproved our thoughts on that in the first 10 minutes. So she stepped quite nicely into the overall logistics support for us, which is kind of nice. And the regional district, because of the regional emergency program that the city of Grand Forks is a signatory to, because of that, they'll be running the finance piece of it. So that's generally what the recovery team looks like. Each of these sections will have their own little sort of organizations under them as they need to. So, I mean, you can imagine, I'll just pick the environmental one there that Jessica runs. There'll be a number of environmental-based projects. You know, there'll be engineers out doing things and that sort of stuff. So her section will expand and contract as well, as needed, as will everyone else's. Housing will be another good, all of it. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay, so before we go into some of the details here, I just want to kind of paint a bit of a picture here around the complexity. So from my perspective, looking into this event, and now that I'm inside, I'm kind of looking around and I'm looking out, I can tell you that this is a highly complex event. And we don't have enough hours in the day for me to share with you everything that I'm seeing right now, but I'll just give you a couple of examples, and I'll invite you to start thinking about this, because for the most part, the people that have been impacted at this stage, up to this stage, have been primarily thinking about the impact in their world, right? Okay? And I don't want to downplay that by any stretch of the imagination, because that's absolutely critical and important, and we shouldn't downplay that at all. But there's a lot of that going on out there. So the complexities around a lot of that sort of stuff, we've got to try and figure out how to kind of herd all this sort of stuff together and get it all organized so that we can kind of help solutions along the way here. So in the housing sort of stuff, just to give you an example of some of the complexities, well, many of you know that the river basically established a new course in several locations. Okay, well, that's got implications on where people have been living for probably decades and whether they're allowed to live there or not. Okay, and that's just not a decision that can just be made overnight. There's got to be some good engineering, there's got to be some good science, there's got to be some good modeling goes behind this, so that the best decisions by your leadership, your community leadership, can be made, the best informed decisions. Okay, so under the housing branch, some of the things that we already know that are going to have to be done, there's going to have to be some sort of a placement function. So some of you are going to need housing sooner rather than later. Some of you are going to be looking at sort of a 1 year to 2 year kind of a solution to your challenges and what have you. So somewhere in this whole process, you're going to have to come into the system, and we're going to have to figure out what works best for you. So we won't be putting a single 22-year-old male who's working at the local mill into a 4-bedroom apartment. That's just not on, right? So we've got to make sure that the suitable housing goes to the suitable need. There's a building inspection element to it, and the city is very encouraging of you that you participate in that where necessary, and we'll speak to that a little bit later here. We also know there's only one building inspector. We know that there's potentially a couple, 300 or 400 homes that could need building inspections, which is far more than just one guy can handle. So we're looking at outsourcing some of that and perhaps bringing in teams of building inspectors from other municipalities and what have you in the region. Okay, we know there's going to be some demolition that's required for some houses. And it's one thing for somebody to say, I don't like my house anymore, I think it should be demolished. But we have to qualify that with a professional. So we'll have to bring in some engineers to look at that and say, absolutely, this place needs to be demolished or it can be rebuilt. And then once the houses are flagged for that, then there's some coordination on that demolition and the disposal of all the debris. So it's not just as simple as taking the debris from, I don't know, 20 or 50 houses or whatever it turns out to be, and just putting it up at the dump. You know, there's a life on the dump, There's a use plan on the dump, and it's based on population growth and a number of other things in the area. So one option might be that this stuff gets trucked down to a place south of the border here. So there has to be some coordination on those sorts of things, we know. We do know that there's going to need to be a bunch of rebuilding going on. We also know that there's a number of folks that aren't general contractors and don't quite know how to go about that. So somehow some assistance related to that probably. There may be cases where there might have to be property negotiations. You know, there's going to be some hard decisions coming up. So that's going to require experts. That is not just somebody who does this off the corner of the desk at the city. You know, this has got legal implications and land use implications and all that stuff. So we know there's going to have to be property negotiations at some point here in the future. We also know that we don't want you having to run around and talk to 27 different people trying to get your solutions, right? So we're embracing a case management model where you'll probably end up having some sort of a primary contact to go to when you need solution or you've got resolution on something or those sorts of things. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, well, the wellness branch here. So here's an interesting one as well, because this is clearly not one of those things that's just automatically funded under the Emergency Program Act, but there's been a lot of trauma and stress in the community, and there's a lot of really, really smart people that work with Darren and in the network that Darren's a part of, a lot of subject matter experts, and they're telling us that 12 to 24 months out, we're going to start seeing signs of that trauma and that stress. Some of you may be seeing it right now. You know, maybe some of the kids are starting to act out, or somebody's drinking more, or whatever. But this is going to start to demonstrate or present some challenging indicators. You know, there might be more substance abuse. There might be an increase in family violence. Right? There's just a whole lot of these social elements. Okay, well, that's not just something that you can easily predict and put a dollar figure on now, right? But we know that that's going to be there. So that's an example of one of the complexities, one of the many that Darren's shop will be dealing with. So we also know in that wellness branch that there's some sort of an outreach. You know, in the perfect world, everybody's on the internet and they just go on and they fill in online forms and everything's done electronically, but we know that's not the case. So there's been a lot of active outreach by a number of organizations, and there's a group forming up under Darren here to maintain some of that outreach over time here, because we want to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. And we're going to ask you to keep your eyes open too, within your own family unit or your friends and neighbors or somebody you see walking down the street that you just happen to know. If you think they're struggling with something, you know, get in touch with Darren's shop or whoever's appropriate or whoever an outreach worker might be or what have you. And we'll try and see if we can help those people. We don't want them to fall through the cracks. Okay? We know there's an element of unmet needs. So a good example of that right now would be some of the folks who've had their assessments through the DFA program, Disaster Financial Assistance. Okay? Because of the assessment value of the homes have been lower, yeah, they might be getting some money, but it's not enough to get into a new home. Okay? And I'm sure just about everybody in this room knows somebody like that. So fortunately, and I'm not making any wild promises here, but fortunately there's a number of organizations, humanitarian faith-based organizations and what have you, that have mandates around helping people with social housing. So we need to know who the people are that need the help so that we can go out and try and find that help with all these different organizations. And there's a lot of them that are sort of stepping up to help. Okay, and again, a case management kind of model around this one too, so that we can make sure that folks are getting managed as they go through the system. Next slide, please. Okay, so the environmental branch. So this has been a big one here. Well, so I already used a bit of an example, but I'll explain another complexity here that is sort of presenting itself. So there's a lot of people who own property on the river, and over the years or decades, there's been a lot of people that have put big boulders or riprap or armoring or whatever you want to call it in the river to protect their property from erosion. Awesome, good for them. But if you think about it for a second, what happens to a big, nice, wide, slow, lazy river when it hits a canyon? Okay? The water speeds up, it becomes far more furious and powerful. Okay? So on a lesser degree, there's some of that going on in the different river systems around here. So just throwing a bunch of riprap in to protect somebody's house It's not quite that simple because it has to be viewed in the context of what's the impact across the river or downstream or upstream if the water's going to back up, and how does that change the erosion path of the rivers and things like that. So there's some complexities around that. That's just an example. So we've had the river hydrology assessments. We've seen the first draft here this week. And then Graham, you're going to speak to this in a little while, are you? Oh, Jessica, okay, you're going to speak. So I won't mow your grass on this one, but suffice it to say, this was one of the first things that we flagged that first week that I was here that was critical because people were asking, do we rebuild or not? Because the river changed its course. So experts were brought in, and I'll leave that with Jess to talk about a little bit here. Okay, the debris management. Well, a lot of you saw it through all the stuff that you hauled out of your houses and put on the street that Dave and his folks arranged to have removed. But there's also an awful lot of debris in the rivers. Okay, there's a lot of natural debris, so there's old log jams that have been there for years and decades. They form a natural part of the river flow. There's also some new ones. So next high water, you're going to see those new debris dams or deposits or piles or whatever you want to call them, starting to influence what the river does and where it goes in a new way. So we have to understand that a little bit. So we've had some folks look at the debris side in the river, and they're working on a plan right now on what needs to be removed, where it's going to impact residential, industrial, commercial, critical infrastructure kind of values. Okay, there's some environmental quality work that has been done, and there's sort of more coming here. So people were concerned about soil, water, air, those sorts of things. I know the agricultural sector is very concerned about the impact of some of the contaminants on their food-bearing lands and those sorts of things. So there's some stuff that needs to be done around that. And again, this will be done sort of in a project management kind of a basis, as opposed to a case management where we're kind of following you as you go through the steps here to make sure you don't fall through the cracks. This is a pretty easy one to kind of cookie cutter and just say, here's a contract to go remove all the debris from this piece of the river to that piece. And then it becomes just a contract management kind of a piece. So quite simple that way. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, economic recovery. Well, here's another challenging one. Okay, this has got many complexities as well. This is a real simple one and may or may not make sense to some of you, but if you just go on Google and you Google Grand Forks, British Columbia, the top 10 returns that you get on page 1 of Google, when I looked at it yesterday, 4 of them talk about flooding. Okay? So what does that mean to that tourist from Germany who's coming over with his brother and his sister and his parents and all the kids, and they're renting motorhomes and they're going to go driving through British Columbia? Well, if they Google Grand Forks as part of their trip planning and they say flood, they might just decide to go somewhere else instead of stopping down and spend the money here. Okay? That doesn't sound like a very complex thing, but you get thousands and thousands of those people not doing that, when already you've got challenges with at least 40 different businesses not being open right now, and having lost a good chunk of their sort of summer annual revenue sort of piece. It becomes very complex very, very quick. So your economic recovery, we know we've got the Downtown Business Association, the Chamber, and the BC Economic Development Association engaged. BC Economic Development Association is kind of an interesting one because this is a group of economic experts like Jennifer from around the province that have got experience in disaster economic recovery. And that's just different than normal, let's try and create some economic development programs here. This is far more challenging because of the impacts are much bigger on a broader sector or many sectors of the economy. So again, this one sounds like it could work very well for a case management model, I think, Jennifer. Okay, next one. Well, this one at this stage is probably the one of the cleanest and easiest, and no small part due to Dave and how he's running the show, but the majority of the critical infrastructure, there was a bit in Midway, but the majority of it was here in town. So kind of as a normal course of what Dave and his folks do every day in their business, they're repairing a bunch of stuff. You know, they've got some municipal insurance that covers it all off, most of it, excellent. There's a bunch coming from the DFA folks, awesome, excellent. It's a fairly clean one. Okay? The debris removal, same thing. It took some time, but it was just a matter of scheduling a bunch of pickup and delivery to the dump sites and those sorts of things. But it's going to get really complex when they got to go into the dikes and the infrastructure stuff. Okay, so short-term power stations and roads, that's easy. Longer term, where do the dikes go? How do we pay for them? How do we get them built? How high do they have to be built with the new flood levels? And all that sort of stuff. So lots of complexity around that. So I think Dave's World's going to get a little more exciting here in a couple months when we kind of know some direction in this. Okay, next one. Okay, so we've got some folks from the BC government that have stepped up, of course. Emergency Management BC, I know Gwendolyn's in the room. Okay, Flynn Roard, which, I mean, I'm old school, so that's Ministry of Forests, or Forestry as we all like to call them, but anyway, that's Forest, Land, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development. And so the big play here in a lot of this stuff, for these guys, it's either to do with the environmental river stuff, or it's to do with the rural development and the economic development stuff. Okay, so we've got a few folks from Flynn Roard around. Shared Services BC has also been actively engaged. I know Ministry of Environment is also here in the room. Interior Health Authority, I'm thinking is in the room here tonight. And this is where I'm supposed to insert the stuff from Ron, so next slide. Okay, so I inserted the stuff from Ron a little bit later on. Okay, so anyway, there's a number of non-government organizations. So a number of you were supported by Mennonite Disaster, Samaritan's Purse, Red Cross. There's a number of groups like that. Your local churches stepped up in a big way. Lots of volunteer support for those sorts of things. So there's lots of different organizations and other agencies that are also kind of out there right now. And we're just trying to figure out how they can best fit into the overall solution. Okay, I think the next one's on the slide. Nope, it's coming, I promise. Okay, so I just want to speak to this one really, really quick. Because last week the Red Cross announced the HEAP program, the Housing Emergency Assistance Program. Okay, a number of you went and applied for that, and awesome, you were accepted. Checks in the mail sort of a thing, right? But a number of folks weren't initially accepted. The initial filter that the Red Cross folks were putting on it was based on the rapid damage assessment information, okay, which it was an awesome tool for a point in time, but it wasn't the be-all end-all. So what we worked out with the Red Cross was anybody who doesn't get through that first cut, come to us. And then what we do is, first of all, we take a look and say, well, were you in an evacuation area? Yes, no. And pretty much everyone was. And then the next one, and I'll put this one on Graham here because I think it was him that was fortuitous enough to, or foresightful enough to start realizing that at some point you need to know where the high floodwater levels were. So using a bunch of digital mapping tools, he's able to take a look at the highest floodplain level that we recorded at the peak and overlay that on top of the houses and different imagery. And it's very easy for us to say, yes, they were in the floodplain, or no, they weren't. And so far, everybody that's come to us pretty much looks like they were. But if that doesn't work, one of the other options we've got, and we've used on a couple of them, is to go to the Disaster Financial Assistance Program and all of the applications. And there's, I think Gary told me today, there's over 500 applications for DFA right now. Well, not all in town, but in the boundary area in general. So from that, we can get some pretty good indication that people, you know, are having some challenges. We've also got the Samaritan's Purse work orders. So we can go there and see if there's any work done on the property and what the nature of that work was done. You know, we've got the RDA stuff, the rapid damage assessment stuff. We've got another filter here, the building permits, as people go in for that. And then, failing all that, we can go to aerial photos because there was a gazillion of them taken by people. And if all of that doesn't work, then we'll go to site and we'll take a look at the place. But quite frankly, we really haven't had to get past the first 3 bullets yet. And, all the ones that I know that I've dealt with so far, there was 11 in the first day, I think on Monday or Tuesday or whatever it was. It was pretty easy in about 15 minutes just to figure out that, yeah, they do qualify. And we punted that back to the Red Cross. So presumably by now those folks have been contacted. If you haven't been contacted, but you're one of those folks, just be a little bit patient because it will come to us from the Red Cross, and we are jumping on it every day. I mean, Michelle is one of the people, and Travis, the new guy, doesn't know this yet. That's going to be one of his jobs starting tomorrow as well. Okay, next slide. There we go. There's Ron's slide. Okay, so provincial recovery support. So there's some of the traditional stuff like the Disaster Financial Assistance Program. Won't go into that one because any of you that have been engaged in that program, you've got a pretty good sense of what it's about already. I think you've been interacting with Tim and his team or talking to Carrie or what have you. There's expanded recovery support for community-led recovery. And I just want to emphasize that It was a very conscious decision by our leadership in the city and in the regional district here joining to make sure this was a community-led thing and not something that was led by a bunch of outsiders. Okay, so Ron, actually, you know what? I'm wondering can we have the folks from all the external agencies just kind of stand up for a second, just so we can get a sense of how many are here. So there's a few in the room. Yep. Okay, good. And there's quite a few more kind of on the other end of the phone in pretty short order. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so Ron's leading the provincial government side of this recovery team. It's a number of different agencies inside government, and I don't think it's limited to EMBC, Service BC, Ministry of Health, or Flynn Roark. But there's provincial level support around the flood hazard assessment stuff. There's a bunch of work related to the authorizations to work in streams. There's going to be technical work required and guidance required around any of the diking or repairs on diking and those sorts of things, right? There's some folks that have been involved with the short-term assistance in housing and providing guidance around some of the longer-term options. Economic recovery, same thing. Development of short, medium, and long-term options. And to the greatest extent possible, leveraging existing options or networks of programs already. Health and wellness and social support, working with the local partners to identify needs and gaps. So again, through Darren's organization, they're already well tapped into a lot of these government support organizations. So what you'll notice here is that those bottom 4 bullets are very, very similar to the bullets that we've got in our recovery organization. So what Ron and his team did was they looked at what our needs were here locally, or what we thought our needs were, and they basically mirrored their organization to support that. So that what that should mean is that should align the support to the best way possible. Okay, and I think that's the last slide, but we'll try and go one more and see what happens. Oh, there we go. No, there's some numbers here. Okay, so these are the numbers for each of our sort of operations branches. So the economic recovery stuff through Community Futures, that's the office to their front desk. You can get that out of the phone book, of course. The environmental stuff, that's the number to the office that Jessica's team has at the RDKB building. The 442-4411, the 4111 number. Okay, I've highlighted housing and unmet needs. And the reason I've done that is because currently, one of the phone numbers floating around out there, it belongs to a local woman who's been absolutely hair straight back since the start of this stuff, Rachel Warner. And great for her for doing that. And when I talked to her last night, she's out of town right now, she said, yeah, go ahead, give everybody my number. But we also have to mind that she's been going hard at this for a couple of months. And there's going to be some long-term implications. And it's likely that 6 months or a year from now, people could still be calling her number in the middle of the night. So we have to try and be mindful of that. So we've gone to TELUS to get a new dedicated number for all the housing and unmet needs stuff. We don't have it just yet. I guess there's a bit of a process to that. But anyway, we do have the Emergency Operations Center number here up, and that's the 1-888-447-9119. So daytime, somebody should pick that up unless we're in the middle of meetings. But nonetheless, I mean, Brandon, I think you check that 4 or 5 or 6 times a day at least. So somebody will get back to you if you leave a message on that one. The critical infrastructure stuff, well, that's the City Public Works. So there's the number to the city right there. And then I've got the Red Cross number up here as well. 1-800-863-6582. I think a lot of you are aware of the types of supports that the Red Cross can provide. So those should be the main numbers that get you to talk to somebody at some point that can help you with any of your sort of challenges. Okay, I think that's the last slide. Let's try one more. That's it? Awesome. Okay, so I think on that one, Callan, that's all I had. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry. I got a couple more things here. I'd like to introduce a couple gentlemen from Rockwell. They've been a staunch supporter since this all happened. And I don't know Mike McKellen or Phil Sweeney. Mike or Phil, who's coming up? Okay, Mike. If you could, a little bit to what you guys have got going on.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mike McClellan. I'm with Human Resources with Rockwell in town here. I've only been in Grand Forks for 1 year. Came out here the year of the first flood last year, and this year followed up with this really big one. Rockwell, or Roxall before that, has been in town for 20 years. It's a huge part of the community, really supportive of everyone. While everybody in the community was affected, we were affected as well. The flood impacted our factory greatly. A lot of our employees were greatly affected as well. And beyond the site of Rockwell factory, the community in general was really impacted. And we wanted to take the time to see what we can do to give back to the community. And what we did come up with and thought was a good idea was a flood recovery donation program, wherein we will donate to registered flood victims, residential homeowners, up to 20 bags of insulation at no cost to assist with the reclamation process. We've worked with the City of Grand Forks and the Regional District to develop the program. And to be eligible, you need to first have a flood recovery number and work with the city to get a building permit. The city and the Regional District have the application forms, and you can encourage you to get them as you go through your building permit process. Get an application form, fill it out. They'll determine if you qualify or not. Then they send it over to us at Rockwell. We will do a quick assessment to determine what your eligibility needs are, how many bags you need, and then we'll work through the process to get those delivered to you. Not delivered to you, you'll be required to come to the factory to pick them up. We have created a website, a web page. It's at rockwell.com/Grand Forks. So if you just Google that, it will take you right to details on the program. It will also have a link to the application form, and it will also give you some frequently asked questions about, do I qualify, what to do, what is the process. So it's something that we just rolled it out today, and you know, all of Rockwell is very thankful to the community of Grand Forks for everything that has happened, everything that people have done in the community to help each other, and it was very inspiring. And the employees at Grand Forks Rockwell factory here also, a number of them, you know, did payroll deductions to contribute to the local Red Cross and to the food bank. And those donations were also garnered from Rockwell factories across North America, out in Ontario and down in Mississippi. So there were donations from all across North America. So we're looking forward to getting the program. It'll be up and running now, and it'll run for approximately 1 year. So I know it's not something you can get your building permit done right away and get it sorted out. So there's no real mad panic, but we're here to help and support you as you go through the process that runs through right to the end of July of next year.
I think what I took away from that was, don't move where Mike lives. Okay, so the other one I had is Lena here from the Red Cross. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me see. Do you want to have do you have a couple things you wanted to say as well?
Hello, my name is Alvina Konevsky. I'm the recovery manager for the Canadian Red Cross. Really lovely to see that this is a community-led recovery initiative. As you know, the Red Cross comes temporarily into the community at the invitation of local authorities, and we do as much as we can, and then we do exit, but we are here for now, at least for 3 to 4 months. We are located in the basement of the Legion. Many of you, I think, have been to see us at various locations. A couple of points that Steve very well mentioned, but I want to emphasize that if you were rejected for the HEAP program, and you feel that you did suffer extensive damage to your home, I strongly encourage you to come back to us and have another chat with us. So you can call us at that number to schedule an appointment. You can drop by the Legion to schedule an appointment with a caseworker. But then, as the RDTV mentioned, it does take a couple of days, up to a week, I would say, for us to check on the damage to your home. And this does go through the regional district, and rightfully so. Rightfully so, not rightfully slow. Very quick. I actually received some feedback that you guys have been very, very quick, and I want to express gratitude for that. And I want to assure everybody that we are on the process. But if it's been a week and you were flooded out and you're really suffering, or even you are feeling the impacts, I do encourage you to come and talk to us. We are open, and we will be there for the next few months at the very least. Okay, and I'm here for questions at the end, so come find me and I'll happily chat more.
Thanks, Lena. And I think from my perspective, that's all I had for now. And who's next on the agenda, Kevin?
Everyone is next on the agenda.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
So we have about 45 minutes for questions, and I'm hoping we'll get through everyone's question. If not, you have the phone numbers, and of course these folks, like the Red Cross, maybe sticking around for a few minutes afterwards if you have a more specific question. The way it's going to work is that if you put your hand up nice and tall, I'll come to you with the microphone, and then if you can speak, the trick with these mics is if you drop them down here, you can't hear anything. And if you drop them up here, it's kind of hard to hear you. So you want to get them right in front of your mouth so everyone can hear. That's right, there's a sweet spot on the microphone. These guys at the front will answer your question, or if it's for someone who's sitting down, who's one of the external resources, then they will also come up and answer the question. And then we will make a record of the questions. So I think I'll go up one and then down the other, just for some space efficiencies. And starting now, because I see the hands are up. Also, if you feel into it, if you could identify your name or just what neighborhood you're from, that would be great.
Brian Fate, and owner of the Riviera RV Park with my wife. And I can attest to the lowering of tourism in our area because we usually get a lot of foreigners. And we're averaging maybe 5 or 6 RVs per day, when this time of year we're between 22 and 25. We barely got our park reopened again because of all the flood damage, and so we're trying our best. The second is the question is now that this is up and running, where do we start, each of us individually, to share our need and get into the process of getting the help we require?
Is it on? Oh. Hi, Brian. Thank you. So what we've decided to do in the short term is engage with the business community on a more focused group approach to helping try to identify the impacts that you're experiencing right now as we go through what would typically be our busy season, and to try to attach some bigger picture categories to that and a dollar figure somewhere down the road. We'll be doing that in the next few weeks, hopefully, with some provincial representation at those tables. And we'll be reaching out to sectoral businesses, so we'll be engaging with the tourism business owners such as yourself. We'll be talking to agricultural producers. We'll be talking to the retail DBA, downtown business mix as well, and trying to figure out an approach for the impacts that you're experiencing and moving forward as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah, we'll be reaching out to you. We're just trying to nail down a few dates. We'll be doing this here in Grand Forks and in the West Boundary as well. And once we hear back from the provincial partners who we need to be there as well, we'll nail down some dates and we'll be reaching out to everyone. Social media, print media, telephone, whatever it takes. So please watch for that and give me a call anytime. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name is Dave Soroka, live in North Ruckle. I'm not exactly sure what my question is. It's like, there's been speculation. Well, first of all, no one's actually been able to tell me whether the dike is supposed to be looked after by the city, the province, the regional district, who's in charge of fixing that dike. My question is, are we wasting our money fixing our houses right now? Are we supposed to be just sitting on our hands, because that drives us crazy? Is the dike going to be fixed? If so, we're staying. We're going to fix our houses up. But if the dike is not going to be fixed, I just want to know what's the plan.
Sure, so I'll ask two people to join in. That's first Jessica Mason and Dave Reed. Kind of, there's part about kind of the hydrological assessment and then part about the infrastructure. So.
So one thing that Steve mentioned that I did want to talk about a bit more is the hydrological assessment. And basically, in basic terms, it's a river study. So everybody probably noticed the helicopters flying over, and part of that was our river hydrologist. And he was, flying over and looking at the river and looking at the impacts that happen in the different neighborhoods. And basically where that study is at is that he has submitted a draft, as Steve mentioned, but it requires technical review. Like, that is a major study that's done. And so we have other engineers that are river engineers that are reviewing that study and providing feedback. We have internal people that are, planners that work for the city and for the regional district who are looking at that and looking at the various options. And then there will be a public kind of engagement section to that starting on July 23rd and during that week. So you will be hearing more about that. Does that answer your question? Or?
Close enough, I guess. Just not regular.
Yeah.
Whose dike is it?
Yep, you know where this going. So it is a registered dike, and we're working with the inspectors of dike to get our permitting in line to do the repairs. We had to do some emergency temporary works. So now we have to have an engineer come out and have a look at them and make sure that they were done to a permanent structure standard. And if not, we'll be pulling all the work that we did out and redoing it to that standard. So you do the best you can, but if it's super saturated, you have to change the way you're building it. So we'll be looking at that as early as this Friday, and the permit applications are going in next week for the fish window this September. So I guess what I can say is for sure we should have the temporary works or the dikes back to the shape that they were in prior to the event this year.
What about higher? Better, much better.
Higher and better is part of the hydrological study that we're working on and the broader plan there. Yes.
Are you planning on
Hey, if you don't have the mic, please wait your turn.
Kevin's got the mic. Derek's got the mic.
Okay, my name is Derek. I'm in South Ruckle. First for the demolition assessment. You're too late because my home's already demolished and hauled away. Now we're looking at the rebuild, but really we don't know what we're doing. We need guidance and direction. And a big thing is financial. I appreciate the help we've gotten from the DFA and the various agencies that have funded the Red Cross. Realistically, it's nowhere near enough to build a new home. And we really don't know what we're going to do. I'm not sure anyone here can answer the question, but I'd like to know who regulates locked-in retirement accounts. Is it provincial or federal? Because I need to contact them to withdraw my retirement in order to be able to rebuild.
So there's two parts to that. Thank you, Derek. So one, the recovery manager, Steve Newton, has recognized the need for support around the assistance for helping people rebuild and technical expertise and even just the building permit part of it. Our building official Dave Bruce is really good at helping people along, but he's one guy where hundreds are needed, I think. So Steve's identified the financial resources around supporting the capacity end of it. On the financial end, we've noted that gap, and we're looking at all the available capacity around supporting rebuilds as well as replacement homes. So we don't have the funding answers to our questions yet. We started putting together a project plan, and we don't have the confirmation yet on what that looks like, but we've identified that that needs to happen as quickly as possible. So I don't know if you can speak to that further.
That pretty much sums it up. I guess this is probably a good point for me to make that kind of hard statement. Be prepared to not be fully made whole again, if that makes sense. You know, we're not going to guarantee that somebody's going to come in and get you a brand new house that's going to be better than what you had before. We're going to do everything we can to try and make that happen with all of the organizations that are out there, and there are quite a few of them. Again, the big piece for us is we need to understand your need, so we need to kind of get you into the system so that we know what those needs are. So the way that we've sort of been working it out here amongst the different organizations that are involved is that there's people in different organizations that you're talking to every day, and it's our hope and our sort of guidance that if they recognize that, so if Derek, is it? So if you just happen to be talking to somebody, I don't know, or maybe you're walking down the street and you just happen to bump into Dave and you're chatting a little bit more about that, well, Dave will cue to that and he'll know to come back and let us know. Maybe he'll take your contact information. There's been quite a bit of that going on already, and it's got to be organic in the community as well as just us trying to go out and find you. But I can't promise you a brand new, better mansion than you had before. We'll try to get there as best we can. Yeah, safe, warm, and dry. That's just one of the realities of what this is about. You know, I can't give you any better news than that, I'm afraid.
And actually, that's my other concern. I'm not really concerned with bigger and better.
Yeah.
My concern is we're too late to build for winter. I'm just wondering what we're going to do.
Yeah, so we've got the housing section here, and Bob's part of it. And there's some folks in the room from the provincial government here, and the reason they're here tonight is so that they can understand the complexities of our challenge, because we absolutely recognize that while most of the short-term needs have been addressed by RVs and motel rooms and billeting at friends' places, that's not really adequate going into the winter. So, you know, by October, I mean, we've got to come up with something for a number of folks. And then we also have to be looking at stuff in place by, you know, next spring, next summer as well. And it's not just as simple, like there's land around, but there's not a lot of land. I don't know where you live, but it could be that your land is an area that may not be allowed to build in again, or recommended not to build, or whatever that ends up becoming, or not. And at that point, we don't really know much about that until the hydrology engineer's report has been vetted and it's gone through City Council and also to the Regional District Board, and a public process. And you can probably speak to that better than I can, because that's your world. Yeah, so, yeah, so all I can tell you is that there's a lot of people working towards a solution for you and everybody else in the room.
My question is about the debris pickup on the streets. Is that going to continue? We have still got another whole shed and a bit to go yet.
So the debris pickup curbside is scheduled to end this coming Monday. So if everybody can get their stuff out to the curb by this Monday, so through the weekend and that, we thought that would help. The demolition and that portion will be a separate, but we had to have a cutoff for the curbside pickup. So as we mentioned, the demolition, if you could see your building inspection department, that'll be a separate piece, but the curbside will close Monday.
Will the dump still be piece? Or did we have to take the stuff?
We'll have to work through that. I guess if you could give me a call, I can check, but I'm sure we could work with you there.
Hi, my name is Liz Mason, and I have a rental property on 65th Avenue that was badly damaged. I'm just concerned that I have gone through the proper channels and I'm just playing a waiting game, but small businesses seem to be exactly what you're talking about, falling through the cracks, just like Brian. As everybody knows, rentals are difficult to find in this town, and yet we're having to pocket hot water tanks and raise up all the electrical and get new furnaces without any support. Do I just have to keep waiting, or I don't know how many other people in this room also have rental properties, but I know it sounds like a bad word. Even some organizations that I asked for help said no, because you have a rental. So can anybody help me?
Hi, Liz. I spoke with another individual who's in exactly the same boat as you. I have had a meeting with Disaster Financial Assistance, and I'm assuming that you've applied to disaster, yeah, okay, and not insured.
I'm on the list.
You're on the list with your insurance company.
No,
with DFA. Okay. So maybe I'm going to let Carrie try to step in here, but you're absolutely right. Rental pool is extremely scarce here. Positioning it as a business, it needs to be your primary source of income. So if you've got all that lined up, Carrie, do you want to step in at this point?
Hi, I'm Carrie Dowling, the coordinator with the Disaster Financial Assistance Program. And as we've been mentioning, it is a challenge with people who have rental homes applying as small businesses. It has to be your major source of income, and often that will preclude you from being eligible under our program. So the best we can do at this point is to continue to encourage people to apply so that we can at least understand where the needs are and then determine what the unmet needs are. And then we'll be working with the Community Futures Group and the Economic Development piece to try to identify what those unmet needs are and try to find some solutions for you.
Liz, have you heard back from the disaster?
No, absolutely. I've been in constant.
Yeah, and Carrie, can you just talk about how many applications?
Yeah, so right now we've got, as stated, well over 500 applications in for disaster financial assistance. I think right now the count is well over 70 or 80 of those are really to small businesses. Quite often there's a bit of a delay with the small businesses because the first step is us to ensure that that small business is your primary source of income or your major source of income. So it means going back to you and asking for financial information, perhaps tax returns or corporate information, and so there's a delay with that process.
So maybe you can grab Carrie's contact information in this before.
Hi, my name is Adam Klesnikoff, and I live by City Park on the downtown side. I'm going to touch on the dikes a little bit more from what Dave said. Obviously, the Rockville dikes need to have some levels, but what about the areas that weren't diked, such as City Park, BMX track, Johnson Flats? Is there plans put in place to look at those areas? Because there's a lot of low-lying houses in those areas that are affected.
Yeah, that's also part of the hydrological study. Now you can see why that study is so important. And one thing to mention, I wish I had a map to show you guys, but we have a map of all of the areas that were flooded, and it is wild. Like, you can't believe what the river did. And in that hydrological study, what's so important is that we find places where that water can go. And actually, City Park is a great place where the water can go. So we actually need to allow those areas to flood so that other areas don't have as much of an impact. And that's what that study is looking at. If you build a dike or a berm in one area, well, you might be flooding out the people right across the river from you. Or your neighbor. If we know that people are starting to put rocks right, into the river to protect their property, their neighbor might pay the price for that, right? And so that's part of the other work that we're doing is in-stream workshops. I know a few people have been asking about them. We had one in the West Boundary, and we'll be having them more here to kind of help people through that process if they do want to protect their own property. I know that's a side note, but I just wanted to let people know that.
Okay, so that being said, a place like mine that will always be affected forever and ever unless there's dikes put in place in City Park. Is the city going to buy my property, just let it flood there and let me walk away?
So that is part of the study. It's looking at the different houses that are adjacent to the park and looking at how they can be protected, if and how they can be protected, and where the dikes can be built. So we'll know. So that I would really encourage you, be a part of that public engagement process that happens in the week of July the 23rd, starting the week of July the 23rd.
How do I do that?
That
This is a really big thorny issue because every placement of a dike or every non-placement of a dike can affect, different people, whether they're living right beside an existing dike that needs repair or whether they're beside a future flood protection works, and it's an incredibly challenging issue. So we're getting all of the engineering input this week. We're having a vigorous discussion about all of the trade-offs. And then there's going to be council decisions coming up about the overall strategy. After that, there's detailed scoping. Steve mentioned the negotiation piece. We don't have a list of properties that say, X on this one, Y on that one, but there's a process that has to be fair, it has to be open, it has to be, understandable for anybody that might be in one of those gray areas, right? So we understand this is probably one of the trickiest issues any community has to face. So we understand the pain that caused the uncertainty, right? I know that applies to a number of you. So what happens after a major strategy is started, council is going to be probably looking for some feedback on the type of process, and then there's detailed work that needs to happen, and also some community planning functions that need to happen. When you rezone an area, you have to do outreach, you have to get engagement. Likewise, if you're considering floodplain function and that kind of stuff, there's certain things we can't do without the public engagement legally. So that means that it takes a little bit to have that conversation. We're trying to get the parameters right now. So I think just look forward to, we know the need is there, we want to make sure we do this right. We also know everyone has a very urgent need. So we just, I think a cautionary tale is looking back to some of the dikes that have built in many communities in the past, and they ended up being what was needed. And understanding the hydrology, how the river moves, the river study, as Jessica calls it, the problem didn't start overnight, and we can't solve it overnight. So, just get ready to engage in the process in the coming months.
So don't fix my house, is what you're telling me?
Not at all. Because this can be a very long-term process, and it may or may not affect an individual house. Right now, the lack of housing actually means that, being in a habitable house, if your house can work, that's something that we want to work with people with on an individual basis, because we don't know what the decisions are yet. I think making sure the houses are cleaned out and ready to be repaired, I think that's the first step. Yeah.
I have a question for y'all if you're ready. In the event that an address has been incorrectly assessed for the level of damage, what are the steps to correcting that issue?
So are you referring to that rapid damage assessment with the color placards on the door?
Yes.
Okay, so again, I want to just mention to you that was done initially at a point in time just to identify whether it was safe or not to go back into.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so at this point, presumably you've been back into the house or not. I don't know that. But if it was correctly assessed, so by that I'm assuming it probably was assessed green when it should have been yellow or something to that effect. And this is part of the Red Cross heat application maybe? Yeah. Yes. Give us a call at the yellow number up there and we'll get you into the system. Also, the Red Cross is giving us almost daily a list of everybody that has been denied initially through that process.
Right.
And then from my previous slide, we've got a number of steps that we can go through to make sure that you were or were not. And so far, I don't think we've really seen anybody that wasn't affected or wasn't in the floodplain. A lot of it probably just was finger troubles when the assessors were going through the heat of the moment and they hit green instead of yellow.
Right, it was hot to it and get people out there doing
Pretty much. And that process was also actually, I guess in my experience, I've never seen re-entry planning happen as fast for so many people.
Right.
But in basically 2.5 days, they assessed about 1,600 homes and 1,100 homes got back in.
Things get overlooked.
Yeah, exactly. So start with that number for sure.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Coming back around the other side.
This is the point where Kevin runs. Nope, not seeing it.
It was slow motion run. I saw a hand over here.
We'll get him to come down on the front
backwards.
here. Get us one.
Here we go.
I'm Cal Swollen on 2nd Street. It's very generous of Rockwool to offer approximately $900 worth of insulation to the residents that got impacted. My question is the city going to charge us for building permits?
Is that you or is that you?
We're totally aware of that. I believe there's a discussion happening at council about the question of various permits because there's an impact on many people from that. So I don't know if I can.
That's a good question, and working in conjunction with Rockwool, we will be discussing this with council because, first of all, why would we be charging you for a building permit had you not had the flood? We would have not gained that monetary gain in the city. That's my approach, and my recommendation to council will be any permits that will be waived.
Hi, I'm Betty Ann Mackay, and I don't have a question, but I have some information for you all. The British Columbia Quilters have donated a quilt for everybody who was flooded. Now, Kathy Corlick is in charge of it, but she said she doesn't have time to run around and find everybody. So if you've been flooded and you go to Kathy, she has a quilt shop, but I forget what it's called. She has a quilt for everybody. So there you go.
Hi there. I had just one quick follow-up on the permits. So I had a electrical contractor come in today and going to put a new box in and stuff. So he's got permit fees to get us that are passed on to me. Is that part of that same thing then, or is that to Florida's, or why is that? Why is there a permit requirement for that then? Well, I mean, I realize there's a permit requirement, but why is there fees attached to it then? Because it's not cheap, right? But that's the first question.
That's an excellent question. So the city supply area doesn't include North and South Rockwool, as you're probably in that neighborhood. Is there a Fortis representative? I don't think there is tonight. So I think we could pass that on for a follow-up question.
Yeah, the safety branch.
Safety branch, there we go. So, go ahead.
Okay, so just so we can capture that correctly, what you're asking is if you've already incurred some costs for some permitting, can you get reimbursed for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's just imminent right now. I have to, he's gonna come do some work there in the next few days, and yeah, there's about $265 in fees.
Yeah.
So I just wonder why that wouldn't sort of, maybe fall into the same. Of course, if it hadn't flooded, we wouldn't have an electrical need either, would it?
Okay, so what we can do is we can bring that back to some city folks tomorrow morning.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a good flag, thanks.
And the other question I had was, the one I wanted to ask actually was, last year we had a fair amount of groundwater, and it was so close to going into our cottage, like within an inch. In the past, from what I understand, they would pump a lot of that groundwater back out of there into the river. So here we are 2 years in a row. This was different. I get it. A lot more water came in, but I didn't see any pumping or anything going on. Is that permanent? Like that's never going to happen again, or? It was pretty scary last year. I wouldn't want to watch it creep up again and wonder, geez, they just fixed this down place and I'm going to be putting at the very least new floors in again or something, like next year. Is there a plan for that at all?
I think that that's going to be part of the hydrological study to see areas that are affected by groundwater on a regular basis, and yeah, how that correlates with the dikes and the plan for the different areas. So.
Good evening, my name is Hank Randrup. I live on Riverside Drive. Just for the panel, just so you know, I took a Snickers bar on the way here, so you should be safe. I just got a couple of comments and maybe 2 questions that won't require anything longer than a 5-word answer. We've talked about the social pieces here, we've talked about the economical pieces, we've talked about the environmental stuff. I'm not really hearing anything about what we're going to do to control the water, what's going to happen next year. We're like 9.5, 10 months away. You look at the Netherlands, they keep the Atlantic Ocean out of Holland. In Venice, they got huge wave inhibitors in the ocean to prevent that. We've got 2 rivers here, and I'm not taking anything away from what happened. This is a disaster. It cost me my basement. I struggle to understand what we're really going to do to make sure that, recovery is great, but if you do the same thing over and over and over and expect some different results, the recovery is going to be meaningless at the end of the day. Now, a couple of questions I have is there like a gag order on people who phone and ask for information in the city? Like I'm looking at help, and I've contacted 4 people, contractors. They're big, huge contractors. They work for cities, they work for governments, they work for countries. They don't want to deal with me. I've had one of them personally take me under his wing and try to help me. Now I've called the city, or I've emailed the city 3 times. Once they have on my behalf. I haven't heard a peep from anybody. That's 6 weeks now. The other thing is, when you build a dike, and I've heard this from all 4 of these people, and Urban Systems is one of the people that you've retained, that when you build dikes, you must incorporate a seepage control system when you're doing that, otherwise it's worth it. I had nothing come over the berm, very close, but everything came up to the ground. Now I'm looking at myself spending maybe my own money, because no one's going to pay for it, 15, 20 grand, I don't know, to build one big badass sump collection system, and all I want to do is talk to somebody and say, is that do I have a 5% chance, a 10% chance, 100% chance? Well, no one's going to say 100. But will it help me or won't it help me? That's all I need to know. And if that's so, is there any funding available for me through the city or through the city to help me with the provincial or whatever, to maybe take some of that burden off of me so I don't have to put that money up myself? I don't want to be living in a house. And let me tell you, people all down Riverside, I don't know, I've been here 5 years. It's become the norm for them to live in a basement that floods every year. They take their stuff out, or they have a basement that's just totally blank. I didn't move here and buy that house here to not have my basement functional. So, the question is there funding available? Are we going to do anything about seepage control when we build the dikes, or what are we going to do?
That's a large question, so I'm going to hand it to Jess, and then maybe I'll jump in after.
I know I keep saying the hydrological study, but when you're talking about urban matters, that is urban systems, that is a consultant that we have retained to work on it, and they are looking at at dikes and where can they be built and how will they be built, and part of that is, as you mentioned, trying to control some of the groundwater. I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be super hard, and so we're going to look at that and we're going to think about that. It's going to be part of the plan, but I'm just telling people need to know that it's not going to be easy to control the groundwater. I think the other piece, I don't know, Steve, if you want to talk about the funding or not, because he was getting at it with the clean, dry, safe place to live, and actually you have that. And so there probably won't be funding to help you with a large sump to pump out your basement, unfortunately, because you have a clean, dry, safe place to live. I don't know if you want to say more. I mean, I can totally hear you there, but I think you're saying a bypass duct that goes through a certain part of the city or around it. It's very unlikely, I'll tell you that right now. The initial draft that we've seen from the hydrologist, that kind of a scenario is very unlikely. And it's really hard to control the river, and to build a bypass duct could be like an incredible amount of money and still not do the job that we want it to do.
I was just gonna comment on Facebook. You were mentioning that there was a plan out there for bypass. When the hydrologist was contracted, they were told to look at every option. So I think they looked at a few different bypass options and all of that. Whether it's going to be economical or the most viable, I haven't seen yet that portion of that, so we can't say. But we're looking at everything. When you say you can hold back the ocean, absolutely. If money is no object, and depending on the properties involved, you can do just about anything. So we're trying to work within the funding that we think we can collect, because we can't do it alone as a city, we can't do it alone as a regional district. We need the province and the feds to help us out. So we're trying to take into account all of these different aspects and come up with a good plan that works for the most people that we can accommodate.
Hi, my name is Irina Makortov. I used to live in Almond Gardens Road East. My house is hanging from the cliff. And I have two questions. First, if it's not just for me, for all of us, if we go back to houses, do we have to pay for hookup electricity and gas back? Because we've been unhooked. And the second question for Jessica Mays, if we don't allow to put riprap, do you have any other options? Because I had an engineer at my house and we have a plan for riprap and soil milling. And if we don't allow to put riprap, what's our other options, and do we have any?
So the first part with the utilities, I'm not sure if Fortis or Fortis Gas are waiving any for flood victims, but they would be the ones you would contact and ask about that. So if your house is safe to reoccupy and you take them that information, maybe they will hook you up because it was done for safety. So.
And as for the riprap, there are some cases where riprap is absolutely appropriate, and that has to be approved though by the ministry to do that work. And it's called a Section 11 application that you would put in. You'd have an engineering report that would go along with that, and then you would get approved to do that work. We are trying to help people with that process because it's not simple and it's not cheap, right? If you had a hydraulic or an engineer come to your property, you know. So look out for that workshop. We're hoping to have it here in Grand Forks next week at the latest, and so there'll be we're hoping to provide some support for people with that.
Hi, my name is Vendela. I live in Johnson's Flats. I was told that the only dikes that are city-owned are the ones in the Ruckle. So we have some makeshift dikes out there that have just been built up over the years. A lot of areas out in Johnson's Flats have no dikes. If dikes were to be allowed to be built there after the river study, where would the funding from that come from? Or would there be any? Because it's all privately owned through there?
So I think if I understand your question, you're asking that if dikes needed to be established, where's the money come from for that? So there's kind of two pieces of that. One is existing diking infrastructure that was damaged. So through the Emergency Management BC, through the DFA side of things, because it's permitted critical infrastructure that's owned by the city, there's some funding eligibility that way. What you're referring to, I think, the second part here is something that we would call an orphan dike that nobody really owns, that's just kind of just always been there and stuff like that. Well, if the landowner wants to put a dike up, then they become the owner of it. There wouldn't be any funding that I am aware of, specifically for stuff like that. But if there's a large area that needs to be done, as a result of recommendations out of this, the river study that is just sort of kind of wrapping up, there's a federally funded program that's administered in the province here by Emergency Management BC. It's called the National Disaster Mitigation Program, and Dave's well aware of it, and Graham's well aware of it, and most communities in the town, or in the province are. There's access to a fair amount of money that way, but there's a number of steps that the local governments would have to go through to get at that money. Now, our hope is that because of what has happened here, and I believe there is going to be an NDMP application. Are you guys? Yeah, so there is one coming, and I'm not exactly sure what that's for. So there's a number of steps there, and the first one is the floodplain mapping piece. And I know Urban Systems has already been engaged to do a bunch of that, as I believe part of the NDMP. And then from that, then comes that whole process of figuring out what the best solutions are, costing them out, and what have you. So it takes a while. It's probably perfectly done probably over the course of 2 to 3 years, over probably 4 different intakes, I'm guessing.
My name is John Mackay, and I was caught up in the floodplain as well. I'm addressing my question to the environment. Can you hear me okay? Can you understand me? The environment people, are you going to address some of the problems that we have of businesses in the floodplain? Like this year's flood, we donated a lot of tires, glycol, and oil to the states via the river there. And I don't mind the states having it, but it's not, it'll happen again, you know. So are you addressing that?
I'm not 100% sure of the question. Are you saying people that store oil and gasoline in the floodplain?
I'm talking businesses that store that sort of stuff in there, yeah. Basically, I'm talking about the towing company that's down there.
I mean, we had definitely talked as a watershed authority on, we actually, the city councilors provided some funding for us to do some education around the floodplain. I know that's not a law, but it is a place to start where we can educate people of what they're storing in the floodplain, and you know where to store your gasoline and your oil, and because we know that a lot of those things got picked up and put into the river, and I mean that's not good for anything. But as for land use planning, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Candace can speak a little bit to the environmental contamination.
Yeah, we've worked together on that, but I'm tired of speaking, so this is perfect.
Okay, so you know the gymnasium, everybody's seen it. Up to the doors, that entire gymnasium was being filled up with water and then refreshed every 4 seconds. So the volume of water was an Olympic-sized swimming pool, or was it like 4? I can't remember. But anyways, it was enormous. So 1 can of fuel going into that water very well had super minor impacts. That entire can of oil doesn't contain like the toxic benzene, toluene, ethylbenzenes, and xylenes to 100% concentration, so further dilute that by orders of magnitude of thousands. Those are the toxic compounds in hydrocarbons. The rest of them are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, similar to carbohydrates that you eat. So thinking about it in terms of like amount, going into the water. It wouldn't even be detectable. For example, Transport Canada did overflights during those times, and they were able to measure hydrocarbons on the surface of water. And during the peak time, and they can measure down to 20 mils. During the peak time with their infrared technology, they didn't detect anything. So it seems like a large impact in glycols as well. It's another carbohydrate. It's going to be broken down by the bacteria in the environment. Natural attenuation occurs. There's no real giant toxicity. It's really bad when you get the other way of things happening, like a large tugboat sinks in your river. That's not a good scene, because then the natural attenuation can't occur readily, and we actually need to absorb these materials to get it to the point where the environment can take care of itself. Wasn't the case here. The case here was there is historical amounts of floodwaters, and like to the benefit of the environment, anything that went in there was really nothing to worry about. But to verify that, I mean, we hired a consultant, we developed the terms of reference for that consultant. I worked at arm's length now, so I literally, like Jess and I just told the consultant, like, this is what you need to do. You need to look at the LiDAR data, which shows like the flood plain and what businesses and chemicals would have been washed in from those businesses. Then to do that environmental impact study or assessment, and then because literally that consultant is assessing my ability to interpret that data and criticize that, I didn't think it was appropriate for me to even be involved in that, so then Jess took the lead on that, and they can speed up my decisions hopefully the best they can, and if they can come up with something, we're going to follow through some further assessment in terms of sampling. In terms of the US, they were well aware of this flood is happening. They're getting hit hard with it too. So they may have been collecting tires at the other end to send back one day.
I'll just add on that note, if anybody does have an environmental concern or like contamination concern, I shouldn't have said that I'm tired of talking. I'm not tired of talking, I was just thinking you might be tired of hearing my voice. But if you do have a contamination issue that you're worried about in your yard, anything like your neighbor's yard, then you can call us at the 442-4111, and we have that consultant that Candace mentioned coming to town, and he's willing to go to different people's houses. He did take a tour of North Ruckle. He's been down there a couple times, but I don't think he's been to South Ruckle yet. And so call us and we'll get you in touch with him, and he can come meet with you directly and talk to you directly.
Okay, so we're coming up to the end here. If you still have burning questions, you have the phone numbers here. Please feel free to contact them at your leisure. We do want to respect everyone's time tonight, and we are at the end of the presentation. As a short recap, we did hear about the recovery team. You have some faces, you have the phone numbers, you have some more information about the kind of medium-term plans from the team. We heard from the room, we heard concerns about where folks were going to be this winter, about the cost of rebuilding, about the permitting required, the permitting costs, some frustration at the speed of the process. We heard environmental concerns, we heard about dikes, whether they're going to be in the same place, higher, lower, how they're going to be repaired, who owns them. We heard about the small business community concerns from rental properties to campgrounds to other small businesses, and how they can get back up and running in Grand Forks. So there's a broad range of concerns. We're going to summarize that and put it back up. Any additional questions that you would like, that you feel is applicable to the broader group, please send them in. You can always email the city or the regional district or call them in, and we can get some answers back out. In terms of future meetings, Sure, we'll put it to the sounds like everyone's willing to so as long as the front is game, we'll come over Jennifer and get through the questions, and yeah, I'm sure they'll be valuable. As you say, they came from a lot of concerned people.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So like I said, yesterday there was about 40 of us flood survivors who met, and Darren Pratt attended as well. Thank you very much, Darren. So I want to make a few comments, things that came up yesterday that would be relevant for you guys to hear. And then I've got, unfortunately, I've got 8 questions. Some of you guys can probably answer fairly quickly. So one of the burning needs that arose, and I've seen it too, speaking with a lot of flood survivors, is our community needs more avenues to receive and disseminate information. There's still a lot of people falling through the cracks. And one of the things we talked about was, okay, not everybody's on Facebook, not everybody's on the internet, and a big problem too is that people aren't in their homes. I was walking around North Ruckle handing out flyers and nobody's there. So there's a big concern about how we get information to people who aren't there. People aren't living in their homes, they're spread all over the place, they've gone out of town. Some of them are living in RVs with their friends, some of them are, people are scattered, so this is an issue. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday after our meeting, I met a man who works the night shift. He was staying in a hotel at his own expense. It cost him $1,500 because he didn't know about the Red Cross funds that were available. $1,500 out of his own pocket. It almost put him under. He applied 2 days late because he didn't find out in time. So there has to be some sort of grassroots, sort of, very tangible, I don't know what the right word is, way of communicating with people. That's very important so that people aren't missing out. Also, I wanted to let everyone know who is a flood survivor that I'm attempting to form some sort of advocacy committee so that we can all come together and share our wants, needs, and desires, and then bring them as a group to the city. And I think that will help facilitate their work as well as our needs. So, piece of paper, write down your email. I'm going to spread it around the room now. I don't know if anybody in this front row is, yeah, Derek, you guys can pass it around. Okay. Okay, so it's going to me, you signed it? Yeah. It's going, just pass it around. If you don't want to sign, that's fine, there's no pressure. The email list is going to me so I can share whatever is coming up. You can contact me about the advocacy committee. Oh, I'm Jennifer Houghton, by the way. So you did address this a little bit, but I didn't get quite specific enough. There's a lot of conflicting info on who can and cannot receive that $2,800 disbursement. And it would help for us to see the guidelines in writing. Where is that written down? Where can we access that? Maybe you have an answer to that one?
Alina, can you speak to that perhaps?
So the guidelines are actually quite simple. So once you somehow make contact with the Red Cross, we've reached out to a lot of people with yellow and red stickers on their door, or placards, whatever you call them. But if you have that, or you feel that your home was heavily damaged, you can also reach out to us, and then we can do that assessment. It's an online survey. It's really quite simple. It assesses whether or not your home was heavily damaged. And this goes through the RDKB. They're the ones that tell us essentially yes or no on every address. The second point is financial need. Are you in financial need as a result of the flood? That is a requirement. And the third point, the major point is, do you have home insurance? Do you have insurance that's going to cover your out-of-pocket expenses while you are unable to return to your home? So things like hotel, like food, like clothing, like transport. Okay, so it's really that simple. A couple of places where we've had people kind of meander through that process and maybe initially be rejected and have to go back is if the sticker on the door was wrong, if the color was wrong, if we don't have the right information about that, if you have insurance, but they only cover the reconstruction a year down the road, or a million different scenarios. All of these cases, come back and talk to us and have a chat. We are here to help, and we will navigate our processes as best we can to be able to ensure that you get the support that you need. The additional piece that I wanted to mention is the 2850 is not the only support that we have, so it's the HEAT program. We have a bit of Red Cross funds available as well for people that were impacted by the floods, but whose homes perhaps were destroyed. So there's a whole bunch of different scenarios with that. But if you kind of rightfully so, the heat wasn't quite for you, but you are still in financial duress as a result of the floods, come back and talk to us about that as well. So answer your question.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I guess, I'm sorry, one more Red Cross question. Can you clarify how much funding is coming from Red Cross donations and who it's going to? Because the HEAT program is government money, correct? And I understand that there's stuff on the internet about millions of dollars coming into the Red Cross, the government matching it. And so where are those donations going?
It's definitely not millions. There was no S on that. I have to check what's publicly available because I have to not share, internal financial information. So I'll check what's available, and then I've got your contact number. I'll reach out to you. It's not enormous, I have to be honest. And yes, the government matched it, and everything that we're doing, as I think many of you know how the Red Cross operates, you go to the arena or you go to the Legion, and you see a whole bunch of people with Red Cross vests. 90% of them are volunteers. They're literally not getting paid for the job that they're doing. So our costs are actually quite low. We work really, really hard to keep those costs really low. And we funnel everything that we can back into programs. So I'll check what I have publicly available and I will get back to you, Jennifer. In the meantime, I want to ease your mind that it is not millions.
Okay, so I guess the question would be, what programs is that money going to?
That's the needs-based assessments that the Red Cross does. So the HEAT program is separate of that. So whatever we have left over through private donations, and that's being matched by the government, that's what we're doing additional support for. As I described, people that perhaps suffered minimal damage or no damage, but are impacted by the floods financially in other ways, that's what that money will cover.
So can people start coming to the Red Cross applying for that right now?
Yes, they can. And that's actually live just on Monday, just this week.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Here's another rumor.
Jennifer, sir, can I just add one little bit of clarity? So Alina mentioned that it's fairly simple for you to go online and fill in that application form for HEAT. For those of you that don't do online, you can also go down at the Legion there, and there's somebody there to talk to, and a paper form to fill out as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so there's another rumor. It's burning question in their minds. $80 million government money coming to us. Where is it coming from? Where is it being applied? How's it being dispensed? $80 million.
Well, that's a net new one for us. We haven't seen much of that yet, so I would say chalk that one up under pure rumor and speculation.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, moving on. Okay, so temporary housing. People needed housing like 4 days ago because the hotel money ran out. There's some people who are like, I don't know, I got nowhere to live, or they're spending credit cards on hotels right now. What are their avenues of help? Where can they go to live right now?
So I think, Alina, that's a Red Cross thing as well, isn't it? So, yeah, so some people's terms of their ESS support is expired at the hotels, and so they're now paying for their own rooms. But I think you guys have a way of covering that stuff as well, don't you? No? Okay.
So ESS is ESS. That's an Emergency Management of BC program. We work in partnership with them, and we were kind of more involved with ESS than we normally are in this particular response. That's very much a provincial government thing, and they've actually supported people for quite a bit longer in Grand Forks than they have in other places. And once those ESS Once those ESS extensions are over, that's not something that the Red Cross is able to cover at this moment in time.
Okay, so then we go over to RDKP, see the next step. How can we help these people?
So what we just heard then is that the ESS piece of the Red Cross support is run out, and the ESS program is a provincial one that's run, it's an RDKB one that's managed through the Red Cross under a contract. So Chris, can I ask you this question then?
So the HEAP program is something that was developed by the Red Cross and the provincial government. The commitment by the Red Cross and the provincial government to that $28.50 per month for up to 3 months was what takes place what's being offered in place of ESS. So in order to start that HEAP program, we were asked to let the ESS support expire. So, I mean, I guess the response is, if you're not eligible for the HEAP, or the $28.50 per month, and you know the ESS, the Red Cross support is not sufficient, then that comes back to our Unmet Needs Committee, and you know, certainly the focus on the housing piece, it was talked briefly about tonight, but it's consuming a fair amount of time for the recovery team. There's lots of options out there, and they're all challenging. But
thank you. Alrighty. Okay, so this is a big question. May not be able to answer it today, but it is something that is on our minds. So we're talking about, you know, what we're going to do when the water comes down here, diking, burns, etc., etc. What about slowing the water down before it gets here? This is a forestry issue. It's the bigger picture, it's the province, it's the watershed. I, for one, have been in contact with a forester and a scientist who says that the data is already there. And so the data is already there to support, you know, changes to forestry need to be done, and that the current forestry practices are the cause of the big dumps of water that we're getting. So I guess I would like to get a clearer understanding of where either the province and or the watershed authority is going in order to look at the bigger picture. Because we can spend as much money as we want building dikes, but if, and this is what we need to confirm, if forestry practices are the cause, how do we address this? And, you know, this is a big thing. And, you know, according to this same scientist, it's possible to create more jobs in forestry. He's not an anti-forestry fellow, but it's possible to create more jobs in forestry, support our community, and change forestry practices. So how is the watershed addressing the forestry issue? So I'll speak to a bit of that. I think Graham probably could speak a little bit also, but we had, well, I think you were actually at the meeting where we held a watershed authority directors meeting a couple weeks ago, and we invited a couple of people from the Forest Practices Board. They are kind of an oversight organization on forestry, and he actually mentioned the exact same thing that you just said, that there is evidence showing that forestry practices, you know, big giant cut blocks are adding to water issues. And where I was thinking about Graham speaking is, you know, it's also climate change involved in that. But the forestry practices are one of the main causes of climate change. It's all one thing. Yeah, yes, it's all tied together for sure. Yeah. But to your point about what we're doing about it, through those conversations and that relationship with the Forest Practices Board, he's recommended that we actually hire a forest hydrologist. I keep talking about river hydrologists, but they're really specifically looking at the river you know, valleys and where the water is flowing below, and they're not really looking at those forestry practices. And he says to support any kind of recommendations that we want to make, we need to hire that forest hydrologist, and he will look at, or she will look at sub-basins of the watershed, and they can see how much, you know, of the forest has been cut, and they can do a real assessment for our area in particular, and then we would be able to make recommendations out of that. So we are looking at getting, thinking about how we can get some funding in place to hire that that forest hydrologist.
Thanks, I think that's really, really good. I also want to really underline that there aren't any simple answers in a complex watershed, right? So some forest hydrology patterns are kind of snow melt driven with sunshine and the warmth facing large cut blocks on south side of slopes different than north side of slopes. There's a bunch of things that are starting to be well understood in BC around that. There's been some excellent science on that. This one in particular was heavy rain on saturated snow, and the amount of snow was highly unusual, and it was also the second earliest major flood on record. So there's other climate change potentially signals there that speak to really complex impacts. And I think it's just really good to go back to Steve Newton's original thing at the beginning, the complexity of the watershed and the floodplain and the river response to such an event that we had this year. It might not happen exactly this way in the next flood or the flood after. Maybe it will take 5 floods to come back the way it was this year. So a suite of solutions, you know, looking at resilience, I think that's a neat aspect of this. If there's solutions that also support economic resilience, that's great. And that's maybe the other side of the complexity thinking. So we're aware of those issues and want to make sure that we get all the science right.
Okay, so according to this particular scientist, the data is already there, so I'm going to gather it and share it with you guys. It sounds like you are clearly on top of that.
And Jennifer, I would just add that for context for everybody in the room, things like watershed management and forestry concerns are absolutely out of scope for the recovery team. We're focused in on what do we need to do to kind of help you folks kind of in the short to intermediate term.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, those things are way beyond scope for us.
So we need to approach the province, is that what you're saying?
I would say so. Ron?
Just one quick nuance. I was being briefed from the slide that I provided Steve, who just called that one work group flood hazard assessment, but what we actually call it is flood hazard assessment, mitigation, and adaptation.
Need to work in this area really much?
Yeah, I think so. So just a minor nuance, I was being briefed with the slide that I provided to keep everything to one slide, but the provincial working group that we have around flood hazard assessment, the full title of it is Flood Hazard Assessment, Mitigation, and Adaptation. So we're definitely thinking of those big picture issues. We're obviously focused on the near term direct support for the city and regional district right now. Opening comment.
These ones are easy. So there's a few sort of grassroots housing groups that are forming in the community, and you know, Brian Taylor is involved with that. There's a few other people who've been long-term involved in housing, and is there a way that your group, whoever's doing the housing, can coordinate with the community groups? Who would they contact?
That's a good question. So, Habitat had the experience of becoming involved in the Rock Creek wildfire a few years back. You know, we had assisted in helping build a home and other homeowners building homes there. And we did that in partnership with an organization called Mennonite Disaster Service. Those are some of the things that Habitat can bring to bear in being part of the solution. You know, you can't expect any one group or organization to address the complexity and the needs here. So yes, Habitat was invited to become part of the solution, and I think that, one of the ideas that was floated was, do we bring a bunch of ATCO trailers here to town for the winter? And a lot of people, when we discussed this around our roundtable and also in the community, felt like that's a waste of money. That's a waste of resources to, parachute that money out of the province altogether. That we should try and address it by having some homemade, in Grand Forks solutions. So there's been conversations made about, with the bylaw changes, for carriage homes and legal suites, we're trying to get more density in the existing, community neighborhoods. There's been talks about, having small homes as an alternative, and some co-ops. There's been talk of trying to bring manufactured homes into town. We've had conversations with manufactured home builders, and there is quite a strong show of support for them to provide homes at much lower cost than they would for normal homeowners. So, we're trying to find a way to, put those onto land here, whether it's, private developers, whether it's negotiating, working with the city to have that opportunity. So there's no one solution, but I think that there will probably be a forum where a lot of people will be invited to come to the table to share their ideas, whether it's working with some co-ops, working with, neighborhood associations, So there's no simple answer to that, but, I think that's one of the reasons that, Habitat was invited, because, we have a lot of prior relationships established, and I think, one of the key words being shared around our roundtable is, being creative. We have to try and think outside the box, and that's where, like I said, whether it's small homes or portable or carriage homes and laneways, but the need is to have homes by, the end of October for a lot of people. So that's where things like manufactured homes may be a better solution. But also, the city is working on the idea of trying to speed up the process for legal suites, to have more density in the current homes that we have already in the city. And
No, I think that sort of sums it up. There's a lot of brains that are focusing on the housing issue. We recognize that as a very pressing one because of the cold weather coming, for sure. It's just not that simple as ordering up 50 homes and putting them somewhere. There's got to be service lots. They've got to be zoned. There's a lot of law that dictates where you can and can't put homes and what types and that sort of stuff. It's just a reality.
Just if I could just say real quick, one idea might be to take some of that money that might have been out of town or out of province, and somehow through a series of hands, zigzag down to Liz there so she can rebuild her rental unit. There's a lot of rental units that aren't going to get rebuilt because they won't represent 51% of the person's income, which is horseshit as far as I'm concerned, because nobody out here has, and there's a lot of folks here with more than 3-4 incomes, and no one of them represents 50% of their income. Sorry.
So, no,
you were a fly on the wall.
I think I want to speak to there's a group of multiple agencies, organizations in the community that are starting that conversation. We're definitely well aware of it. We'll be part of it at key points. They'll be involved as we go forward. And then what you mentioned, Dave, there is there's a proposal that is at the 95% draft stage and going forward for submission for funding. It's something that is totally different than how things are funded before it. So we're going to be asking for the provincial support on how to make it happen, because it's outside of the box and maybe a little bit outside of, normal practices that they'd be able to operate in. But we're really, really liking the creative solution of investing some of that money into available rental stock, into new suites, into maybe there's an existing stock that isn't being rented out because of a minor repair. Maybe it's a flood damage repair. So obviously the health and safety components are a part of it, but we're looking for a way to get funding into people's hands to make those things in there, and then have rental contracts that are appropriate for the needs of the flood affected folks. So that's kind of the scope of what we're preparing to propose, and we're just tying down the final details on it, and we hear you.
You got it.
No, that was actually my question. That was my last question. Can we find some funding to funnel into fixing up existing red units? Thank you.
So this lady down here has got a question. So just as a side note, Dave, what you asked about there was the conversation a couple weeks ago internally. So there is some creative thought coming around something like that. It's a good idea. It hasn't really been done before, but it's a real good idea.
Okay, I'll put it out there. It's coming up on 8 o'clock. So last question, please.
Thank you, Kevin. And my question actually dovetails right into this. We have an issue with tradespeople in this community, and so looking at trying to get anything built by the fall with the few tradespeople that we actually have here becomes an issue. I'm just wondering. I'm sure you guys are brainstorming and you've got lots of things that you're thinking about, but what might you be working on in terms of getting some tradespeople in here who can do the work?
Well, I will maybe address part of this. The only thing I support, the only reason I would support bringing out trailers here is because I suggest that we need to get a little trades camp together, because we have a lot of people who are in town living in trailers as well. I know quite a few companies who are bringing extra tradespeople from Alberta to come and assist. There's a lot of conversations that are being held to try and bring in contractors and crews, things like foundation crews. So we need to have a place for them to stay. So I'm hoping that that capacity to rebuild will be addressed with the city and with private business to try and find a way that we can house them, but also encourage tradespeople to come here. Because if we tell them they've got to live in their camper or trailer, I don't think they're really too excited about that. But I agree that capacity to rebuild is very compromised. I've talked to a lot of major contractors here who are even prior to the flood were telling me they were booked to the end of the year. I mean, we were going through a renaissance here. I mean, you didn't see any empty vacancy signs on businesses downtown. You had people buoyant in their equity of their homes going up. And so, we can get back to that, but it's going to take a concerted effort. It's going to take a team effort. It's going to take the city, to get behind all these initiatives, as well as the province. And so, but I fully support you. That's one of the things we've talked about. How do we get more people here to help with the rebuilding?
And I would just add that another thing that we've been talking about, and Michelle Sapersi is canvassing all of the local hotels right now, those that are currently open and those that are shut down and hopefully opening by the fall, around the notion of booking blocks of rooms over the course of the winter to put some of the residents in, but also some of the trades folks. And to the extent possible, I would offer that we would focus a bunch of that down on the hotels that have been impacted already and aren't open now, because the ones that have been open have probably seen a bit of a boom, right? So wherever we can, like this notion of trying to keep that $6,000 a month for an ATCO rental trailer in town locally for the local economy, as opposed to shipping it off to some corporate entity, is a primary focus of ours on all levels.
Thinking that such shops might mean using facilities like Pines. I'm throwing out something that I have no idea whether they might be open to that. But there are places around that we could house groups of people through the winter, to do this kind of stuff.
Well, I'll put this out to everybody in the room, and please ask two friends this, but if you're aware of any potential housing opportunities like the Pines, I apologize, I don't know what that is, okay, and if you know that of somebody who's got a rental suite that's not rented, or something that's close to being renovated or not, that maybe we can bring into this conversation around incentives, the more we know about what's out there, the better informed we can be about trying to figure out the solutions. So I would ask you, please contact us. The number's up there, and just let us know if you know something.
So next meeting is tentatively scheduled for 2 weeks from now. We're trying to get onto that schedule. We also have started an email newsletter. So if you go, right now it's on the city's website. There will be a separate webpage for the recovery team. But for now, if you go to the city's webpage and have a look for the email newsletter sign up, and sign up, that's going to be one of the main ways we keep people up to date with meetings and just other updates from the different sections in the recovery team. It was pointed out to me that a lot of folks here, it's not the younger generation that's out tonight, so if you guys do hear of any ways encouraging the younger generation to come out, be it childcare during meetings or bringing out your nieces and nephews or what have you, if that sounds like a viable option from your connections, please do let us know. We're all ears on that front if it needs to be at a different time or a different day. So feel free to send feedback our way on that. We are, as I pointed out, just after 8 o'clock. So I do thank everyone for coming tonight. I thank the folks here for standing up on stage in the hot lights and for getting their faces out to you guys so you know who they are.
I also wanted to mention thank you to all the government representatives, the resource people, the different agencies here, Rockwell. There's a tremendous neighbor-to-neighbor effort happening at many scales.
And also thanks everyone for your patience with us. It's not going as fast as anyone would like. That's the pace we're moving at, but we are moving. So that's the main message from tonight, is these are the people pushing that boulder uphill to try to help everyone out with their efforts of rebuilding. Thanks everyone and have a good night.
Thank you.